Hello everyone, this is Mr. Wolf, and we are continuing to read Fred Korematsu Speaks Up. This is written by Laura Atkins and Stan Yogi, illustrated by Yutaka Houlette, and published by Hayday Books. In the description below there is a link for where you can purchase your own copy of Fred Korematsu Speaks Up. And we are on to Chapter 8, Feeling Like an Orphan. September 1942. Fred and his family are pushed onto a train. Rattling on tracks for 2 days, they climb out into searing heat at yet another prison camp. Topaz sprawls in the Utah desert, on land that no one else wants, designed like a small city. How long does the government expect them to be here? Fred, his brothers, and his parents squeeze into 2 small rooms. Their new address? Block 28, Building 9, Rooms C and D. Fred and Ernest write letters. Back and forth, a friendship grows. Just a little wind and the dust rises like fog all over the relocation center. Fred writes Ernest, "You can't see 10 feet in front of you. We all have to wear masks made of cloth." He digs ditches to help build a hospital, but the men he works with are not friendly. They believe that Fred thinks he is different from the rest of them, that he is more white than Japanese. Fred eats his meals alone, waiting for news about his case. If the court decides in his favor, then all that he has lost, his car, his girlfriend, his freedom, will have been worth it. November 1942. The government lets some Japanese Americans work outside the camp on seasonal permits. Fred gets a job picking sugar beets, bent over for hours, dirt stuck under his fingernails and on his skin. But at least he is working, outside of barbed wire. Then Fred applies to leave Topaz for good and is allowed to move to Salt Lake City. Factories turn him away because he looks like the enemy. He finally finds work as a welder. Just over a year ago, Fred was driving his Pontiac and reading the comics with Ida, gazing at the San Francisco Bay spread out like an invitation. "I don't even know how it is to have a home," Fred writes to Ernest. "I feel like an orphan." And we have a picture of the letter. Fred wrote this letter to Ernest describing the terrible dust at Topaz. Trying to be free again. And we're going to start with the vocabulary word, barracks. Large plain buildings for soldiers and others to live in, often for a short period of time. Trying to be free again. The government used Tanforan as a temporary site for Japanese Americans in the San Francisco Bay Area, while it built longer-term camps in remote parts of the country. When they were completed, the government forced Japanese Americans to move to these bigger prison camps that were surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by soldiers with guns. The government ultimately imprisoned 120,000 Japanese Americans, some for as long as 3 years. Most of them were born in the United States and were American citizens. Many were children and elderly people. Babies were born in these camps. Old and sick people died in them, far from their homes. As the war continued, the government eventually let many Japanese Americans out of Topaz and the other camps for short periods to work nearby. Later, people who declared their loyalty to the United States and had a job or college waiting for them could leave for longer periods, but they still could not go to the West Coast. And even though they were no longer living in the prison camps, they had to report their movement to the government. Fred left Topaz as soon as he could. He moved to Salt Lake City, 130 miles north of Topaz, in December 1942. And we have a map. Topaz, where the government imprisoned more than 8,000 people, was one of the 10 larger camps throughout the United States. You can see the location of those camps. The Topaz prison camp covered 1 square mile and was divided into 42 blocks. Most of the blocks had 12 barracks, each of which was separated into small rooms where people lived, a dining hall, a recreation hall, and a shared bathroom and laundry facility. And we have a question that you can answer in the comments. Have you ever felt trapped in a place or situation? The power of words. What does the word evacuation mean to you? The United States government used the word evacuation to describe forcing Japanese Americans from their homes and into prison camps. Evacuation means leaving a dangerous place for your own safety, like during an earthquake, fire, or hurricane. In using the word evacuation, the government made its actions against Japanese Americans seem harmless. The government called places like Tanforan assembly centers. What does it mean to assemble? Think of a school assembly. You go willingly because you want to be there. No one wanted to live in these camps. The government called the more permanent camps like Topaz relocation centers, not prisons, even though they were surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. If the government had called the camps prisons, do you think it would have affected how other Americans thought about what was happening to the Japanese Americans? We have some more illustrations. Like Fred, Mineo Kubo was imprisoned at Topaz. In this drawing, she shows fierce winds whipping up a dust storm. During the summer, temperatures at Topaz could rise well above 100 degrees. In the winter, ice covered the ground. This drawing by artist Chiura Obata, show an Issei man named Hatsuki Wakasa, who was shot and killed at Topaz by a prison guard because he was walking near the fence. Japanese Americans at Topaz were shocked, sad, and angry about the shooting. They knew they could be killed for doing something as harmless as walking near the barbed wire fence. Enduring hardship. Many Japanese Americans trapped in camps like Topaz created art about their experience. A young girl named Kimi Nagata wrote this poem. Be like the cactus. Let not harsh tongues that wag in vain discourage you in spite of pain. Be like the cactus, which through rain and storm and thunder can remain. And finally, we have our timeline. This is a timeline from 1942 through 1943. September 8th, 1942. Fred is transferred from Tanforan to Topaz. November 1942. Fred gets leave from Topaz to pick sugar beets. December 1942. Fred leaves Topaz for Salt Lake City. April 11th, 1943. Hatsuki Wakasa is shot and killed at Topaz. That is the end of Chapter 8. In the description below, please go to the link and purchase your own copy of Fred Korematsu Speaks Up. But for now, thank you so much for reading along with me.